Okay, we are live with Alexander McCurris in London. Alexander, how are you doing?
I'm very well indeed. Fascinating events. I'm delighted to be here to discuss them.
All right, let's talk a bit about what happened yesterday.
Mm,
Everyone's talking about it, but
mm,
we'll also discuss what happened in the White House. But before
mm.
we get started, Alexander, let's just say a quick hello to everyone that's watching us on Rockfin, on Odyssey and Rumble, YouTube, and the Duran.locals.com. How's everyone doing in the locals chat? Our moderators for today are, let's see, there's me and looks like there's me and there's me. I don't see any other mods. All right. So I will be moderating the chat. And let's see, Alexander, let's just, before we answer the questions, I don't think we really need to get into the detail of the meltdown. I mean, I'm sure everyone's seen the videos
Mm.
of the meltdown
The one, the
by
one,
Zelensky. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
one thing I
Yeah.
would say is that it's been building up for a time. I mean, there's clearly been massive rows behind the scenes. We got a sense of those in our various programs. Have you been watching our programs on the Duran and watching the programs each of us has been doing on our respective channels? What happened yesterday would have come as no surprise. I mean, just to mention my own channel, if you go to 1 hour 20 of my latest video, which was made before Zelensky came to the White House, I said that I thought that there was at least a possibility that Zelensky would throw a scene. Well, there you are.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, I was walking around Athens when I was recording my video yesterday,
Yeah.
well before
Yeah,
the meeting. And I just mentioned that Trump is going to squeeze Zelensky. So I don't know how he's going to squeeze him, but he'll squeeze him. I never thought
No,
he was going to squeeze him in
no,
this way.
no.
But anyway, let's get to questions. I want to answer everyone's questions. I think that's a good way
Yeah,
to go through this live stream. But
absolutely.
before we do that, Alexander, just two topics which not many people are talking about from the meeting in the White House, the Zelensky meltdown. The first one is Trump mentioning Russiagate. I thought this was important when Trump was scolding Zelensky. I guess he was
Yeah.
giving him a good talking down, and Trump mentioned Russiagate when one of the reporters asked Trump, "Well, what if Russia does not agree to the ceasefire?" I forgot the question. What if Russia does not honor a ceasefire
Russia.
agreement?
That-
And then Trump just went into a very well said statement
Oh yeah.
about Russiagate and Putin and everything that happened there. I thought it was a moment of catharsis. Actually, I thought it was
Yes.
good
Yes.
that Trump finally brought this up, and he didn't only mention the media going after him, but he also mentioned how they went after Putin as well.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that statement on
Uh,
Russiagate? Because Russiagate, I just want to mention one thing. Russiagate, I believe, played a very important role in getting to the conflict in Ukraine. And I always go back to an article that you wrote, 2016, I want to say,
yeah. Yeah.
where I believe the line that you wrote in this article when Russiagate was going on, you said that Hillary Clinton, her campaign making up this Russiagate story has placed a bomb in U.S. Russia relations. I'm not exactly sure the quote that you came up with, but I remember that story where you said this whole thing is going to cause a huge mess in the future that Hillary Clinton and her campaign have done with the Russiagate lie. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I remember that article well. I also said that it would plant a bomb under the Constitution of the United States. It would create.
When was that?
It
Do you
was. It
remember
was in
when
the
you wrote
autumn
that?
of. It was in the autumn of 2016, and it was before the 2016 election. I mean, it was before the election that was so controversial. I said that what she had done was that she'd sown seeds of doubt about Trump himself, which it would be very, very difficult for Trump to dispel, and which would poison the international situation, the domestic situation in the United States, so that if Trump won, his legitimacy as president would be constantly challenged, and that if she won, there would be a crisis in her legitimacy as well, because, of course, she would have won the presidency on the back of a lie, which is that the other side was in collusion with the Russians. So, this is a disastrous thing that she did domestically. And I also said in that article that what she was also doing was wrecking relations between the United States and Russia, two nuclear superpowers, and that it'd be very, very difficult to come back from this, given what Hillary Clinton was saying. And I think the second point has now become mainstream, at least in what you might call the independent media space. I mean, Aaron Mate talked about it in a program that we did with him. So that's what I said then. And now coming back to what Donald Trump said, he unburdened himself. Exactly as you say, it was something he's been longing to say for a long, long time. And he is absolutely right. Vladimir Putin had nothing to do with it. None of the allegations that were made against the Russians, that they leaked the Hillary Clinton's tapes to Russiagate, the emails to Russia to Wikipedia, to WikiLeaks. That was, I mean, there's every reason now to doubt that was true. The whole collusion allegation has been completely discredited. It's now accepted that there was no collusion. There's never been any evidence of collusion. The social media story was completely ridiculous. And when it was challenged in court by Yevgeny Prigozhin, of all people, the DOJ withdrew it. So, I mean, the whole Russiagate story was completely untrue. But Trump obviously suffered hideously because of it. And Putin and Russia are still paying the price of it, because there are all sorts of people who go on endlessly, relentlessly, still insisting that the Russians interfered in the American election. And of course they didn't. Now, can I just say, there is something that people constantly overlook. Trump wanted, in his first term, to improve relations with Russia. It was one of his campaign points. It was one of the things that he was elected to do, at least in his mind. And he was right. So he met with Putin, if you remember, in Helsinki, and they had actually a pretty good summit meeting. They didn't agree about everything, but they agreed on an awful lot. And Trump was browbeaten into bringing up Russiagate with Putin. And Putin said, look, I have had absolutely nothing to do with this. And if you remember, after the press conference, when Trump disclosed all of that, there was this enormous attack on Trump because he believed Putin over his intelligence agencies. Do you remember all that narrative and all of this?
Yes,
he was
I
right
remember.
Too. He was right too. Putin was telling the truth. The intelligence services were lying. Of course, Trump at that point would have known that a lot of what Putin was saying was true, because he was supposed to be Putin's co-conspirator, and he would have known that he wasn't. So, I mean, this whole business, that whole extraordinary way in which the Helsinki summit meeting and the subsequent press conference was treated, I mean, it was all a complete, bright, shining lie. And people still, to some extent, trot that one out. And there's never been any admission or apology or retraction from any of the people who peddled the Russiagate lies, about any acceptance that they basically destroyed Russian-American relations. And Trump is very, very angry and very bitter about this, and he's right to be.
Yeah, and he let it all out yesterday, and I thought that was a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. The other point that I would like you to discuss, to debunk, actually, is what really started off the argument, the meltdown between the meltdown of Zelensky as he was discussing things with Vance, and as Vance was pressing him about the realities of the conflict in Ukraine, Zelensky wanted to bring up 2019 and how he has been, he tried, along with Merkel, to negotiate with Putin and with Russia. And it was Putin and Russia in 2019 that would not return his phone calls, that refused to negotiate. on the conflict in Ukraine. Zelensky has brought this up many times, and the media in the West brings this up many times, making the claim that it was Russia in 2019 that did not want to negotiate with Ukraine, and effectively this led to the war in Ukraine that we have going on. Can you explain what happened in 2019? Because this is once again Zelensky being very, very slippery and very trying to be very clever in his lie. But I think we've done a very good job in debunking this, and you've explained this very well as to what happened in 2019. It wasn't that Putin did not want to negotiate with Ukraine and with Merkel on what was going on. It was in the framework of Minsk that Putin wanted to resolve Ukraine. And anyway, what about this Zelensky 2019 lie that he tried to get through to Vance?
Yes, and interestingly enough, Vance wasn't having anything of it, which suggests that he's done some research and understands what the reality was. You have to go back to the Minsk Agreement of 2015. The Minsk Agreement made it clear that the conflict in Ukraine at that time was an internal one. There'd just been the overthrow the previous year of the Yanukovych government, constitutionally elected, democratically elected, supported for a while by the European Union, accepted as such by the United States. Then, as we all know, Yanukovych was overthrown. There was opposition to this from the regions that had supported Yanukovych, first and foremost Donbass, which is, of course, his home area. There was an internal crisis. The new Maidan government wouldn't accept that. Instead of accepting the legitimacy of the protests in Donbass and seeking a settlement, they launched what they call the anti-terrorist operation, and it blew up into a huge conflict, which led to a series of Ukrainian defeats, first in the summer of 2014, and then again in the winter of 2015, when the Ukrainian army got trapped in Debaltsevo. So then we got the Minsk Agreement, which was brokered by Merkel, Hollande, and Putin. And it was an agreement between the internal parties of the Ukraine conflict. The Germans, the French, and the Ukrainians, that's to say the Ukrainian government, the Maidan government, acknowledged through the Minsk Agreement that it was an internal conflict and agreed a series of steps that they would negotiate with each other, that they would take with each other in order to finalize the peace agreement between them. The Minsk Agreement itself was not signed by the Russians or the French or the Germans. It was signed by the two Ukrainian parties, by the Ukrainian government and by the leaders of the militia. There was a leaders' document, which Merkel, Hollande, Lukashenko, who was, of course, the host, and Putin signed, which said that they would do everything they could to facilitate the implementation of the Minsk Agreement. And then the Minsk Agreement was taken to the United Nations Security Council, and the United Nations Security Council unanimously approved it, with votes by the Obama administration and the British government also supporting it. So that was the agreement. The agreement was that this is an internal dispute between Ukrainian parties. There should be a series of steps taken, and that should lead ultimately to a new constitution and new elections by the end of the year being 2015. Well, the Ukrainians immediately went back on the Minsk Agreement. They completely changed the narrative, or at least they distorted the narrative. They insisted that the militias were not genuine parties to the conflict, that it was Russia that was the party, the true party. They tried to, in other words, to internationalize the conflict, to turn it from an internal conflict into an international one. The Russians consistently refused. They said, we're not involved in this. It's between Ukrainian factions. It's not between Ukraine and us. Well, what happened in 2019 was that Zelensky, who had been recently elected, then came forward with the proposal that he meet directly with Putin and that the two of them settle the conflict together. Now, that meant, in effect, that the Russians would have accepted the Ukrainian formula that this was not an internal conflict, but an international one. It would have meant ditching completely the Minsk agreement. It would have been the Russians accepting responsibility for the conflict in Ukraine. And as a result, the Russians would have found themselves under immense diplomatic and political pressure to make big concessions to the Ukrainians. The Russians were absolutely furious. They did meet with Zelensky. Again, this is widely overlooked, but there was actually a meeting in which all the various parties that had been involved in the Minsk agreement were there together, including the militias, by the way. Putin and Zelensky had the one and only meeting they've ever had, by the way, over the course of which Putin asked the question that we know is always, thrown out back at the Russians. Why, if this is a neo-Nazi regime, is it being fronted by a Jewish man? Putin asked Zelensky, why, as a Jewish man or a partly Jewish person, are you fronting neo-Nazis? We don't know what Zelensky's answer was. But anyway, the Russians said, look, this is an attempt to completely change the entire formula, the entire Minsk formula, basically to ditch Minsk and to turn this all into an international conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And this is unacceptable to us. We simply don't agree. So it was a trick. It was an attempt, in effect, at that time, to involve Russia in the conflict and basically to throw the entire responsibility for the conflict onto Russia. The British, the Germans and the French went along with what Zelensky was trying to do, which infuriated the Russians. And of course, the Americans and the British were pushing it also. But that is what actually happened. It was, in effect, an attempt to scrap Minsk and to take this whole process onto a completely different footing.
All right, let's answer the questions from everybody, Alexander. Before we get to it, one final question from me is what happens next? Zelensky did an interview on Fox News. He did not apologize. He said thank you via Twitter to just about everybody, including the Europeans, which I thought was a snarky attempt from Zelensky to mock Vance and Trump, because they told Zelensky, you have not said thank you. So Zelensky went on to X and he posted thank you messages to about 50 to 100 people. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I mean, that was his snarky way of mocking Trump and Vance, in my opinion. But no apology from Zelensky. What happens next? Calls for him to resign by Lindsey Graham. Some parliament members in Ukraine are also calling on him to resign. Zelensky also told Fox News, Brett Baer, that a resignation is up to the Ukrainian people via elections, but he doesn't want to have elections. So where do we go from here? And I'll get all the questions ready and we'll answer the questions from everybody.
He's not going to resign. He's not going to go willingly. He's just got the Ukrainian parliament, and that was clearly done on purpose. He's just got the Ukrainian parliament to authorize his continued rule for 3 months. This man is not going to resign. He came to the United States doing that which he always does: insult his donors. He does this repeatedly, by the way. This is nothing new. He's been doing this for years. Insult his donors, telling them that they're not giving enough and demanding more and more and more and more. And, endless blank checks, ATACMS missiles, Patriot missiles, F-16 fighters, M777 howitzers, HIMARS, multiple rocket launchers, Abrams tanks, you name it, he's demanded it. And the Biden administration always and invariably gave him whatever he wanted. He tried to pull off the same trick with the Trump people. He came along, started insulting them to their faces, came back and demanded more, wanted more security guarantees and all of that. And this time, the Americans at last finally said, enough's enough. No, the Americans were visibly furious, and you can see that there's been a pattern clearly of rows and arguments going on between the Ukrainians and the Americans for several weeks now. And he goes after that meeting, that disastrous meeting, which has put Ukraine in an impossible position. He goes after Fox News, and he does the same thing all over again. He again essentially, well, he refuses to apologize. He hardly gives any kind of thank you. He again demands more and more and more from the United States. He still wants security guarantees. He wants European peacekeepers. He wants all of those things. Now, this time, he's not up against Biden, Blinken, and Sullivan, who've been egging him on and who were weak. He's up against a completely different set of people in Washington. They'll have seen that interview. They'll have seen how he behaved. They've had to put up with him over the last 3 weeks. Notice that he did not come to sign the agreement. He tried to renegotiate the minerals agreement even whilst he was in Washington, to try to get a security guarantee out of it. So the Americans have concluded that this man is not somebody who's interested in moving forward on a diplomatic track, who's just going to come and demand from the Americans more and more and more. And I think that we're now very close to the point, and it might start to happen over the next couple of weeks, when the Americans start cutting off all aid to Ukraine, not just military supplies and civilian supplies, but switching off the Starlink system. So I think that is a real possibility now. Not just a possibility. I would go further. I would say it was a probability. The Americans are absolutely furious. They're furious with the way Zelensky used the British and the French, Macron and Starmer, to try and work them before. You know, we were discussing this in program after program. And the Americans, I think, have had enough. And they're preparing finally to put a stop to this unending flow of weapons and supplies and all of the rest to Ukraine until Zelensky goes, which is the only way that flow in any form can be resumed. Zelensky is not going. He will dig in. He will try to get his European friends to help him. And unbelievably, they're all saying they will, even though they lack the means to do so. I mean, how are they going to replace Starlink if it's switched off? I mean, where is the European equivalent to Starlink? Just say, but so anyway, the Europeans are going to say that, and we're going to have a new narrative in Europe of American betrayal and Trump cozying up to Putin and all of that nonsense. But this is what I think is most likely to happen. The Americans finally having enough, switching off aid, switching off eventually the Starlink system. We will see the Ukrainian military very quickly unravel. The Europeans will wail and scream and rant and rave. They will accuse Trump and Vance of every conceivable sin under the sun, but it's not going to change the situation in Ukraine, and it's not going to change the situation in the United States.
How are they going to replace Starlink? Alexander, have you not heard of Annalena Link?
Of course.
It works in a 360.
I mean, I forgot all about that. You're absolutely right. That is the solution to all of the problems. Yes.
Yeah, they'll switch on Annalena Link.
Exactly, and Ursula's vast rearmament program that's going to deliver all the weapons Ukraine needs is going to do it. I mean, next week they'll be getting 10,000 tanks and 50,000 Patriot missile equivalents, and they'll be marching on Moscow in 2 weeks' time.
The sanctions on washing machines is going to kick in any minute now. Believe me.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
absolutely.
All right, let's get to the questions. From Shaker AG69 says, "Hi, gentlemen. If Putin claims the USA is agreement incapable, then with what assurance for his safety could he ever visit Trump in the White House?"
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, I should say that after the events of yesterday, I think the process of Russian-American normalization could quite plausibly start to accelerate. But despite everything, despite the events of yesterday, I think the Russians are still going to be very, very careful about how this proceeds and how far it goes. And I think we're a very, very long way from the day when Putin is going to go to the United States. Just saying.
Kashmir Thoughts, thank you for that super chat. Nico says, yesterday's events were justice. President Trump told exactly what we were all thinking. We will not be dragged into World War III because of Zelensky. You could see that Trump was frustrated. As you said, Alex, we first had Macron, then Stammer, and now Zelensky, all taking precious time from him. The final straw, and Trump understood this, was when Zelensky basically threatened to drag the U.S. into a war with Russia. It's unbelievable. What is the last desperate move from the EU-USSR? Zelensky, coup in Kazakhstan, war in Moldova. They need to do something. What do the Alexes think it will be?
Well, I don't know what it's going to be, but you're absolutely right. I mean, these are desperate people now because their whole Ukraine project is collapsing, and it's collapsing fast. The Americans are pulling the rug underneath it. And the instinct of the hardliners in Brussels and in London, by the way, and to some extent in Paris, is going to be to try to look for ways to escalate, because they created this narrative that if Ukraine falls, Russia will be marching on Dusseldorf and occupying Lyon and Bordeaux and invading Glasgow and doing all of these kind of things. I mean, insane things. So they're going to now try. This is my guess. Just as you say, they're going to try and give some life to that fantasy, again, in order to put pressure on the Americans. And the Americans, by the way, have wisened up to all of this. They could see right through it. They could see how absurd that is. But trying to expand the war in some way. And Moldova is the obvious place to do it.
Kashmir Thoughts says, last ad hoc live stream was when Prigozhin tried a coup. Has there been such a public spat on wars at this political stage? If this is on camera, did they have Zelensky in a literal headlock off camera?
There is absolutely nothing like this has ever happened before that I can remember. I mean, there've been huge rows between the Americans and their allies. There were between the Americans and the South Vietnamese. There were between the Americans and the Afghans, but nothing quite like this. And by the way, let me make it absolutely clear: it was Zelensky who instigated it. He was furious when he came to Washington because he hadn't got the security guarantees that he was looking for. And he was spoiling for a fight, as he does. And that was what created this whole episode yesterday. People are talking about the fact that he was ambushed. He wasn't ambushed. He instigated it. Vance said it. It's absolutely disrespectful for you to litigate this whole matter on camera in this place. It shows disrespect to the American leadership, and he was absolutely right.
Just his body language alone was instigating it.
Yeah,
I mean, he was huffing and puffing and looking left and looking up and looking right, and it was just completely disrespectful. His body language alone showed that he was itching for a fight, and he got it. Stephen G says, Stephen G says, when you invite a clown into the Oval Office, don't be surprised if he brings the circus. Very true.
Well, we are not surprised. Just listen to our programs. We predicted it. I mean, I'm sorry to harp on my own program, but I said it might happen. If you follow Alex's programs, you will see that too.
Nico says, I'm afraid that Democrats are going to use this against Trump in Europe. Will now start World War III. They will send troops. It's unbelievable, the fact that they just can't stop.
Well, the Democrats are trying to use it against Trump. I think a lot of people in the US have seen through this Zelensky thing a long, long time ago. Remember, Trump won the election. The American people are not, in my opinion, not remotely enthusiastic about Project Ukraine. And watching Zelensky, they're going to like him even less. I was looking at some of the MAGA Republican type media outlets, of which there are quite a few now, and they are furious. So I think if the Democrats try to run with this, they will be out of step with the American people, or at least a plurality and probably a majority of them. Now, about the Europeans, well, we've already said that in response to Nikos's program. They're desperate. desperate people do insane and reckless things, I can absolutely see that they're going to try and do something reckless and insane in order to try to drag the Americans back in. But I think the Americans will see through it.
Nico says Aaron Mate talked to a Ukrainian activist like him, and she said that Ukrainians, even if they don't like Zelensky, they rally behind him against Trump.
Well, maybe they will, but I suspect that as the dust settles, they will gradually understand that without United States, that is hopeless. And there was a terrifying article about Zelensky in The Spectator, which suggested that his actual support in Ukraine might actually be, The Spectator being a big heavyweight British news magazine, perhaps the most heavyweight there is. Boris Johnson used to edit it, by the way. Anyway, it said that his support might indeed be below 10% in Ukraine, and it spoke about what a repressive, authoritarian, manipulative, corrupt leader he really is. So I don't think he'll get very much support. Of course, there may be some people who will support him. I suspect they're the usual people in Kiev who we read all the time in the newspapers and things like that.
Right, the people who are getting their salaries paid for by the United States or by USAID.
Exactly.
See what happens when the salary is not paid at the end of the month
Exactly.
by the US or by USAID if they still support Zelensky.
Exactly.
Arthur Saab says, I fully believe this war was this was planned. Sorry, I fully believe this was planned, pre-planned by Vance Trump to ruin Zelensky. This is not normal diplomacy. This is tripwire diplomacy, and it's glorious.
Well, it would be glorious, but I mean, they have gone out of their way to deny it, and not just deny it. Apparently, there is actual apparent anger about this in the White House, that this narrative that this was a planned ambush is being spread. The person who planned this was Zelensky. He came to Washington furious because he's been pushed into signing the minerals deal without getting the security guarantee from the United States. He's furious because his friends, Macron and Starmer, weren't able to trick the Americans into giving the security guarantee. So he came to Washington and he was again trying to do the same thing he did with the Russians in 2019, renegotiate the Minsk agreement. He was trying to renegotiate the minerals agreement, despite the fact that he'd been warned by Scott Bassent, don't do this. It's settled. It's final. He tried to renegotiate it again to try to get that security guarantee, which the Americans are not prepared to give. They don't want World War III with the Russians. Exactly what Trump said.
Yeah, Irina Baskaya, thank you for that super chat. Lord Nadad says, thank you both for keeping us in the loop. Elza says, I think the Trump administration made up the rare earths agreement to lure Zelensky into the White House so that the whole world would see his epic meltdown.
The person who came up with the rare earths idea was Zelensky. Even the Financial Times, in its editorial today, has admitted this. He passed it by his friend Lindsey Graham, who's now turned on him, by the way. He then brought it up with Trump in Trump Tower in September. He trotted it out again in his victory plan. And he then brought it up again after Trump was first elected and then inaugurated. He's been plugging this thing relentlessly, but he wants a security guarantee. And the Americans have said, no.
He has 35. He has 35 security guarantees.
I know. Well, that's
35.
A good point. Yeah.
Yeah, he has 35 bilateral security guarantee agreements that were signed over the last 2 years, but they were worthless. He wants the U.S. military to fight a war against Russia.
Exactly.
That's what he wants. That's what Starmer wants. That's what Macron wants. They want the U.S. military to act as their proxy. The U.S. military is going to act as proxy for the European political elite. That's what they want.
That's what they want.
That's
exactly. They want to involve the United States in a war with Russia. When Trump said, you're gambling with World War III, that is exactly correct.
Exactly. Well said. Laura G says, loved your visit on Jimmy Dore show yesterday. Yes, Jimmy Dore, amazing. And we thank him for having us on. Something One Way says, congratulations on both. You couldn't have You couldn't have predicted the outcome any better. I've been hanging for this. Thank you so much. Ralph Steiner says, when President Trump asked Lord Starmer whether the British could fight Russia without the US's help, Keir gave a confident British laugh. Is this misplaced?
Well, he's hardly confident. Again, I thought that was a piece of reality which has been missing. I mean, again, the Europeans talking all about, we're going to do defense, we're going to send our troops. If this was so, if they can do all of these things, why do they need the United States? Why all this trickery, all this manipulations to try to get the United States involved? The fact is that they know that without the United States, they cannot do anything. Let me repeat again. The British Armoured Division has 40 working tanks. 40. They have no infantry fighting vehicles. They've given them all to Ukraine. They have 12 guns. How can Britain fight the Russians? The Navy has more admirals than it has ships. The army has almost as many generals as it has tanks, not functioning tanks. Tanks which could be brought into a functioning state over a space of about 3 months. The British military, I'm not going to say it's a joke. There are very good soldiers serving in it, but it is in no condition to fight the Russians and won't be in any condition to fight the Russians for 10, 20 years. If Britain were to embark now on a massive program of reindustrialization and subsequent rearmament, which it is not capable of doing. That's the reality.
Karen Took the Kid says the lack of suit got lost in the haze, but it's significant. Entry-level manners. It's like going to a friend's house for dinner in muddy boots. Says a lot about the Rat King's sense of entitlement.
You are completely correct. You are absolutely so right about this. And the incredible thing about this isn't the first time. He went to Congress in his Che Guevara outfit, unshaved, all of the rest. People didn't like it then. And he still goes and does it. I mean, as you rightly said, the arrogance and the sense of entitlement and what Alex always talks about, living inside this role that he's playing is incredible.
Lorna Dot, thank you for that super sticker. Fuzzy Ball says Zelensky left his walnuts at the White House. Johadi, thank you for that super sticker. Nick says, thank you for keeping us well informed. Thank you for that. Rick B says, Z should have offered to take in the 2 million Gaza refugees. His country is depopulated and he needs conscript soldiers. Problem solved. Trump would love that, but too late now. XO Castle says, do you see any domestic backlash in the UK for Starmer falling in this deal, or did he comport himself well enough?
My own personal view is that Starmer's visit to Washington was a complete disaster. The media, however, covered for Starmer, as they so often do, and pretended that it had been a great success, though he didn't come back with anything. There were one or two articles. There were two articles that I saw squirreled, one in The Guardian, one in the Daily Telegraph, pointing that fact out and what a complete failure the trip had been. But generally speaking, I think for the moment, the British public is still being fed one lie after another. They're being, sold this constant narrative. Now it's the American Trump betrayal narrative of heroic Ukraine. Eventually, of course, they will see through it. But for the moment, at least, for the next couple of days, maybe week or so, they will all be living inside it.
Sergey says, imagine what was happening behind closed doors in the White House. Lunatic on drugs. Well said. The Black Cat says nobody was taking Zelensky seriously. They even mocked his tracksuit. Shouldn't this show to Kiev that he must go? What good would it do to sign a minerals deal anyway if Z is illegitimate?
Well, absolutely. I think in Ukraine itself, in Kiev, amongst the political class there, you can call what exists in Ukraine a political class. But anyway, the power brokers, the oligarchs, people like that, they will be appalled by what has happened. They will be angry and talking to each other and saying to themselves, my God, we've got to find a way to get rid of this man. It's still easier said than done. And if he's got military protection provided by France, then more difficult still.
Matthew says, will Europe march on in on their own?
With
They'll
what?
talk a big game, but with what? Yeah,
We'll
exactly.
talk a big game, but with what?
With what? RKB says, is the AG going to issue indictments to Z and others in Ukraine for interfering in U.S. elections, embezzlement, corruption, fraud, and other crimes against the USA?
I'm going to make this prediction that the investigations in the United States are still only at a very, very early stage. Kash Patel has only just become director of the FBI. There are still investigations, there's still appointments being made in the Department of Justice and various parts of the government. You saw how the FBI tried to hold back the greater part, the most important part of the Epstein files. And you also saw Pam Bondi's response, which, by the way, is different from what we used to get from people like Barr and all of the others in Trump's first term. I think that in a couple of weeks' time, the investigations are really going to get started. We're going to get all kinds of revelations. And those revelations potentially are going to be huge. In America, they're going to drown every other part of this story, and they're going to have an impact in Europe as well. So keep the popcorn ready. There's an awful lot to watch, and it's going to come. And it's going to come now on a scale we've never seen. That's my guess.
Fuzzy Ball says, would the UK's Ukraine agenda be different under Farage, or is the UK government so polluted and corrupted by the deep state that even Farage couldn't save it?
Well, they're now trying to browbeat Farage to distance himself from Trump. If he's wise, he won't, by the way. He'll stick to his positions, as he has done, for example, on Brexit. Was supposed to be an unpopular cause when he launched it. So eventually, if he sticks to his position, the British public, especially working class public, which is where his support comes from, will come round to him. But we'll see. The British deep state is much more deeply embedded than the American one is. I mean, one of the interesting things has been how shallow, in some ways, the American deep state is. I don't mean that in objective terms, but, whatever.
Right. Nico says, I really don't understand what is wrong with people. I saw a Russian liberal yesterday. She is young and ungrateful, and she was complaining about the fact they had the same leader all her life.
Well, there you go. You always find people like that. If it's the media, they will always find someone like that.
Take a pick 1313 says, I think Zelensky played his final big role well. The deep state in Europe did not want to give up the spoils to the U.S. This gave a reason to storm out and not sign everything to the U.S.
Well, it's a reason, but of course it does mean the end of Project Ukraine. I mean, it's unviable without the United States. And Trump, I think, is furious, and Vance is furious, and Musk hasn't believed in this pretty much at any time. So I think this is the end, actually.
Johari says, just need to stop giving Zelensky airtime, else he will just keep yapping about how Ukraine is the center of it all. It's already getting annoying. True.
I would absolutely, completely agree with that.
Ralph Steiner says, Stammer read a wonderful letter from His Majesty to Trump inviting him for tea and scones. Would they have lashings of cream and jam at such a high tea?
I would be very careful drinking tea with the British if I was Donald Trump. You wonder what might be inside the tea. Just saying.
He.M. Hendricks says, would other regions of Ukraine pass referendum to join Russia after the war ends?
It's been floated. Some Russian officials have been floating that possibility recently. One very senior one, I forget his name.
Nico says, saw it here yesterday in Greece 2 years ago. We had two trains colliding and killing 120 people. Like her, people in Europe say the same shit like her, and I am like, what is wrong with you? Talking
indeed.
about the Russian, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Nikos. Can I just say to people who don't know, there's a huge protests in Greece about what happened a year ago, which have never really been people haven't been properly held to account or any of that, showing the enormous disaffection that exists in Greece. But, in Greece, the people just protest and they just go round and round and round and round because they are absolutely in Hotel California and there's no exit.
Yeah. Andis Stanlanux says, I am under distinct impression that this was orchestrated deliberately. All this situation helps Trump to move on and show American people that Ukraine is a fraud. Now he can move on with changes he has already planned.
I think that is going to be the result of this. I think it plays directly into Donald Trump's agenda. But I don't think it was what he staged. I mean, he said he didn't. The word from all of the people in the White House is that he didn't, that he was actually, looking forward to getting this deal signed. Ultimately, it was Zelensky who brought it on. You can see it if you follow the whole thing through, not just the selective clips that the European media is showing. You can see that it was Zelensky who staged the whole thing, or rather provoked the whole thing.
DJ 8 Boss says Kokainsky just couldn't keep his mouth shut and argue. Interpret like a spoiled child.
Yes.
Yeah. Nico says, I live literally in an S-hole of country. Europe is the same. I see Russia with its beautiful train cities and villages, and all I hear from people like them is this is not a democracy. No. If living in a democracy means students like me should die because of greed, if democracy means we should be in constant poverty and war, then I don't want to live in a democracy.
Well, indeed. Absolutely. I understand your feelings.
Sean Derby says, I appreciate your work, gentlemen. Hans, thank you for that super chat. Eric Lacken says, the Duran. Wow. Chili Pepper says, little known fact, Trump is a polyglot like Melania. He speaks over 5 languages fluently. He knew what the slur uttered by Green Goblin meant. Interesting. Ralph Steiner says, with Keir and Charles looking out upon the bedraggled British people from up on high, sipping tea and eating scones, would they spare a thought for the poor?
Well, was it Marie Antoinette was supposed to have said, let them eat brioche? Yeah. I mean, it's probably more true of our British political class than it was of Marie Antoinette, who actually never said any such thing and actually did care very, very much for the poor, contrary to myth.
Lorraine Allmark says, oh, this is so good. Thank you for that. Ben Evans says Zelensky swore at VP Vance in Russian. So many missed this. The meaning translate roughly to female dog, lady of the night. This was the craziest part. Yes.
I know. Absolutely.
Very true. Nico says, I was in Lamia, Alex and Alexander studying in my university 2 years before Trump. I was taking the train. I could have been there. And these people tell me I should go to World War III because of democracy.
You're completely correct. I agree with all your sentiments, Nikos.
Yeah. Matthew says, will the Russians retaliate for Taurus missiles?
Well, can the Taurus missiles work? I mean, that's the point. If the Americans don't provide the data, what can they realistically do?
Yeah. Ivan says, what are the benefits for countries to stay in NATO?
Well, I would have said none. I mean, my own personal view is that if apart from the bureaucracy itself and the various people who are, benefiting from the grift of it, if you're talking about the sovereign states, the nations of Europe, get rid of it, including by the way, that applies to the United States as well. All it is a massive gravy train. Alex has discussed this far more thoroughly than I've ever done, but a massive gravy train for a few people, and that's all.
Tyler Durden says, I wonder how the relatives of the fallen in Ukraine feel. What did they die for? The president was just humiliated in front of the world.
Well, there we go. Yeah, absolutely.
Alexander Marino says, Brian Berletic and Scott from Calibrated were just live saying that nothing changed and effectively the public spat in the White House is a play to trick Putin into accepting a ceasefire. How do you evaluate this position?
Well, I mean, Putin has said many, many times that he's not going to accept a ceasefire. So he's not going to accept a ceasefire. I think the Americans are gradually coming to see that for themselves. The point is, the person also who's not accepting a ceasefire is Zelensky. That came out very clearly over the course of that program. And I think this is real.
Chili Pepper says, I think it was Daniel Davis that said he knows someone that said this is Zelensky's true nature. Behind the stage, he is an arrogant, mean, and cruel, exactly what the CIA likes.
I've heard that as well. And all I can say is go to The Spectator. I mean, admittedly, it's behind a paywall, but try and find that article. It came out recently by an official who knows Zelensky himself and knows him personally and worked for him. And you see what this person says about Zelensky.
Paul Walker says new Russian FPV drones use Starlink now.
Mm.
Savina says, do you think that Europeans will try to team up with the US Dems and impeach Trump over this?
Yes, quite plausibly.
Christian says, off the topic, today's a big protest day in Romania.
Yeah.
Interesting. Elza says, a Podoliak, last week in Munich, I received standing ovations for my show. Why was I kicked out in Washington for the same program?
Oh, good one.
Cash says the U.S. still wants to hurt Russia. Europe just buys their weapons so the U.S. can pivot to the east. The war continues.
Well, that could very well be the outcome. But I think people should not underestimate how angry people are. I mean, if I can just go back to the previous point that this is all a piece of theatre put on to deceive the Russians. This goes far beyond theatre. I mean, the emotions that were there in the Oval Office were real. I mean, I've worked with people when they're angry, and I've worked with people who are pretending to be angry. The people who were in the Oval Office were very angry.
There's no way that everyone was acting. There's no way.
No.
No way. Yeah, this was real. Ralph Steiner says, please, sir, I want some more, whispered Oliver Moore, shouted, Kid Starver, you ingrate. Do you think we are here to serve the people? Why is this? Hannon Calorician, thank you for that. Super chat. Mark Hewitt says, when is Trump really going to tell his citizens how bad the Ukraine situation is? It is not a stalemate.
Well, it's not a stalemate, and they came very close to saying that. I mean, J.D. Vance came very, very close to saying that over the course of that Oval Office meeting. I think we're going to start getting more and more revelations about the realities of Ukraine, as I said, over the next couple of weeks.
Fernando says, new lie, Russia violated some agreement 17 times.
Yeah.
Talked about that. Christian says, my country, Romania, is a puppet for EU bureaucracy.
Yeah. We are both shocked by what has happened in Romania, and we are fully behind the Romanian people in their protests, just to say.
Fernando, thank you for that super chat. Anon, thank you for that super sticker. Mr. Willow says, let's assume the worst case scenario. NATO wants to go to war with Russia. Firstly, why? Secondly, what happens after? Russia will undoubtedly wipe the floor with Europe. But then what? Is this World War III?
Yes, it is. It's World War III. If NATO goes to war with Russia, NATO loses if it's a conventional war. So what then? Nuclear weapons? At which point, given the realities of the nuclear arsenals, we're all dead.
Yeah. Klaus says he looked like someone on drugs. What do you think?
read the Ukrainian media about this, or the Ukrainian media in exile.
Chili Pepper says, thank goodness VP Vance told the Western people about kidnapping soldiers. Wish they would say more. First time ever my family actually listened to me.
Yeah.
Libusha says, it's funny to watch the EU elite panic about potential withdrawal of U.S. troops from East Europe and scream about territorial integrity of Ukraine. They are quite selective about it and only remember the principle when it suits them.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Excellently said.
Annan says, unfortunately, I can see this conflict lasting for the rest of the decade, despite the Joker's tantrum in our sacred Oval Office.
I think more likely a year. If American aid is withdrawn, I think the Ukrainians apparently have enough weapons to keep fighting until the summer. And then we'll start to see an accelerating collapse. But there will still be many, many problems, even after the Ukrainian army is defeated. And it will require an awful lot of work to bring it to an end. People overlook the fact, if I could just give an example, the American Civil War, everybody thinks that it ended in, was it March 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse, the deal between Grant and Lee, in which Lee's army surrendered. In fact, the official date for the end of the American Civil War, the war between the states, if you prefer, was the summer of 1866.
Yeah. Elvis says, thank you, President Trump, MAGA all the way, for telling that con man, comedian, and thief where to go and what other weak leaders like Genocide Joe, what he never had the spine to tell him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Linda says Zelensky is out of his mind. President Trump is our hero. iMan News says, Alex Christoforou, love your programs. Such a funny personality. Alexander Mercuris, love your analysis and famous saying. Just saying. Thank you for that. Meadowcur says Zelensky better remember what happened to Ninh Van Thu, the last president of South Vietnam.
Very good point.
Ponish Production says if Ukraine joining NATO is a problem, why isn't Finland and Sweden joining NATO not met with the same reaction by Russia? Ukraine supporters talking point. I'm ignorant on this matter. Love your show.
It is an incessant talking point, but the Russians have consistently said that Ukraine was far more important to them because it is a much, much bigger country. It is far deeper within the territory of the former Soviet Union. And of course, if we're talking about military potential, Finland, with what's a population of 4 million, Sweden with a population of 8 million, they're not able to march on Russia. They can't attack Crimea or Donbass or any of those places. Ukraine, a much bigger country, would have been a potential military threat to Russia, and it would have risked closing off Russia from the Black Sea.
Yeah. Game of Chairs says, isn't Russia sitting on most of the minerals anyway? Yes.
Yes.
No? Nigel Green says, Stormer out. Cheers, lad. Stormer out.
Yeah.
Cheers, lad.
Yeah.
Blinded by the Light says, thanks for your good work. You were saying that the minerals deal was a way to ensnare the U.S. in Project Ukraine. Now that the Green Goblin has done this, can Trump now walk away from Ukraine?
Yes. I hope he does, by the way.
Rochas, thank you for that super sticker. Double Down says the collective West is undergoing a partitioning.
No.
Richard Wild says, do you think Trump will look at Macron and Stammer in a different light? It is obvious that these three were working together to sway the Americans.
Yes, I think he will. I mean, we've been saying all that, by the way. We made that point last week when they were coming during the two visits of Macron and Starmer. And we said there was all of this thing was part of, if you like, a plot to try to draw the Americans back into the war.
By me, something, thank you for a super sticker. Sir Most Game says, where the tuck is Podolyak when you need him. A Podolyak for president. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. David Lazarus says, will Sean Penn ever give his Oscar back? Harry C. Smith says,
I believe.
They never do. Harry says, how are the UK and EU media covering this cataclysm?
Oh, I mean, they're taking completely Zelensky's side. I mean, this is again very selective clips of the Oval Office interview, but Trump bullying Zelensky, this poor, innocent, gallant, heroic leader. There are a few admissions somewhere that Zelensky didn't handle it all terribly well, but ultimately it's all Trump's fault. This is the line that they're taking. And as I said, in Britain, many people will buy it.
Yeah, I know, Alexander, you have to do a hard stop soon in like about 4 or 5 minutes. Just let me know when you need to go, and I'll finish off whatever questions we have. Yeah.
Yes.
Ramboon, thank you for that super chat. AZ Mary says, what do you think about Kaya Kallas saying that the free world needs a new leader after this? Is she decider in chief now?
Well, indeed, absolutely. Kaya Kallas, a leader of a country with a population the size of the English city of Birmingham. She's the person who decides who's going to lead the free world. Apparently, she also had a huge row with an American official, accusing that official, the US government, of appeasement, which is pretty rich, given which side most Estonians supported during the Second World War, just saying.
Yeah. Paul Walker says, isn't Zelensky having an impeachment against him? Dubinsky posted on X.
I think my own personal view is that Zelensky's a dead man walking politically. I think, once the dust settles, it's going to be very difficult. But I think that you're going to start to see concerted moves in Kiev to get him out, because everybody can see that this man is a disaster. He's wrecked the relationship with the United States. He's mismanaging the war catastrophically. Putin talked about that. And he's got to go.
Yeah, agreed. Need No Reason says, the American right-wing political reactors, Asman, Gold, Devory, Nuxaner, do not understand the situation properly and are all commenting on it. Why do you guys reach out to try to educate them?
what we should do, maybe. But you know, we
I
do
mean,
what we can. We're here
we do what we
every
can, yeah.
day. I mean, we spend a huge amount of time. Anybody can listen to our programs and hear what we have to say.
Share our programs. Share our programs.
Share our
Linda
programs.
says Americans do not give an S what the world thinks at this point. To think he could go in there and bully President Putin, what an idiot. Trump left him in the dust for the whole world to see.
Absolutely correct. So absolutely right. I mean,
Yeah.
the one thing Americans,
Robin
in my experience, don't take well is when somebody tries to bully the United States, and doing it in the Oval Office, litigating the whole question. I mean, really.
Yeah. Robin R. says the aim of European leaders is not really to support Ukraine, but it's just an excuse to try to concentrate more power in the EU institutions with these stories of common defense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
John Matthew says, why is the EU backing Ukraine? Do they want a big war? Will it be the end of the EU? U.S. gas reserves are now 38.7%. Seems the EU wants Russian resources. What is wrong with Germany?
Well, what is indeed wrong with Germany? I mean, Alex calls the new chancellor, you know, Merz, he's not yet the chancellor, a bonehead. And that is exactly what he is. You know, at this moment in time, the fact that reserves are down to 38% ought to be their principal point of concern. What are they going to do? They're going to anger and antagonize the man who provides them with whatever gas they're still getting, who is, of course, Donald Trump now, as a result of the decisions they themselves made.
Christian says, can Trump save Romania from EU war games?
Well, the Romanians are appealing to him. We will see.
Sir Muggs Game says, the train to Kiev is the geopolitical Orient Express. Every passenger guilty of murdering Ukraine. Will Putin, the Russian patriot, bring them to justice?
That's a very, very good one, actually.
Yeah. Bimai Something says, are Ukrainian oligarchs behind Zelensky and warned him not to sign the mineral deal? Are they holding on Ukraine wealth that they don't want to share?
There is a real possibility that that is true. And that's a very, very good point as well. I mean, they're probably furious with Zelensky for bringing up the whole topic up in the first place.
Sir Mouse Game says, to be fair to the EU, every asylum for the unworried, unwell has its resident Napoleon, Churchill, and Joan of Arc.
True enough.
Kaiser Sose says, Z called JD a bad Russian word.
Yeah.
True. Johan, thank you for that. Yang Domain, thank you for that. Patrick, thank you for that super sticker. James Ball says, pragmatism is a difficult concept for so many in politics. Zelensky's choice is binary and will be short-lived. It's obvious he is realizing this.
Yes, I agree with that.
Alice in Wonderland says, hey, lads, been a while since last I was here. Hope you two are doing well. Depressing time for the UK, but hoping the US has a much better outlook.
I agree.
Sir Muggs Game says, is it wise for the US to pump and dump UK in this brutal manner? Zelensky came across as the bunny boiling type.
Well, about the UK, we are bringing all these problems upon ourselves. And, you know, we shouldn't look to blame the Americans for them. I mean, the Americans are not running our economy. They're not running our political system. They're not running our foreign policy. We're doing all that to ourselves.
Martin says, why sign the minerals deal if the US won't stay anyway?
Well, absolutely. You know, if Zelensky had straightforwardly said to Trump, look, I'm not prepared to sign the minerals deal, this is it, then that, you know, that would have been a position. But he came to Washington saying that he would sign the minerals deal. And at the same time, the moment he was asked to put his signature, which is basically what happened, he started making further demands, which is what he always does. There is nothing new, by the way, in Zelensky's behavior. He is habitually rude. He habitually insults his donors, his so-called friends. He habitually accuses them of, you know, backsliding and not going far enough to support Ukraine. And he demands the earth, the moon, the sun, and the sky. And that's what he always does.
Yang Domain says, thank you. Thank you for that super chat. Marisha says, thank you, guys. Marina says, thank you, guys. We need people like you delivering the truth. Thank you, Marina, for that. Sir Muggs Game says, even though you look down your nose at Varoufakis, read his brilliant article in Unheard explaining the plan behind Trump's tariffs.
I don't look down my nose at Varoufakis. I have said many, many times, I think he is a brilliant economist and in many respects an incisive and extremely shrewd commentator. I don't think he was the right person to be Minister of Finance of Greece at the moment of crisis that he was. That's what I've always said about him.
Black Tie, thank you for that super sticker. Ralph Steiner says, it only takes one ICBM to spoil your whole weekend.
Yeah, it certainly
Johan,
does, yeah.
thank you for that super sticker. Superfly says, will the UK get its gold back from Fort Knox?
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what's inside Fort Knox. Just saying.
Ariman, thank you for that super sticker. Tim Jones, thank you for that super sticker. Swanee says, I believe Zelensky is the third Antichrist. Michael says, which countries provide drones to Ukraine?
Good question. I am going to make a guess. The United States. Now, I don't believe the Europeans are anywhere in the drone game at all. Ukraine makes an awful lot of its own drones. It used to make them based on Chinese drones that it was buying, and it was, redoing. But they do make their own drones now, at least to some extent. But I suspect the Americans are to a great extent involved in the whole production process.
Savina says, what do you think will happen to Zelensky?
He'll resign. He may go to France. He could end up in a villa on the south of France, and he'll be having to think all the time about who might be coming after him.
Mr. Willow says, what are your thoughts on NATO member states in general, in context of will there be countries leaving NATO to more align with Russia from an economic point of view?
Well, eventually things like that probably will begin to happen. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're probably getting very, very much closer. Better that NATO be just done away with, as the Warsaw Pact was. And states can then start making relations, building up their relations with each other in the normal way that happens everywhere else in the world.
Oh, just a few more likes, and we'll probably get 15,000 views. But Alexander, when you need to leave, let's.
We're almost
at 15,000 people watching this live stream on YouTube.
Yeah,
wow, thank you guys.
Thanks. Just a few.
We only have a few more.
Catherine's fine about it.
Wooden Banjo Boy says, I remember hiding under my desk in grade school because Russian missiles were overhead. They have been at this a long time.
Yeah.
Jungle Jin says, apparently Polymarket was setting an 89% probability of Zelensky being deleted in 3 days.
We must ask
Elza says,
Robert Barnes about this. He's the man who knows all about these
Polymarket. Yeah. Elza says, after that, Trump should go to Moscow on May 9th.
Well, he said he won't, and I still think it would be probably an unwise thing to do. But I think he will go to Russia. I'm going to suggest that maybe not Moscow initially. Vladivostok might be a good idea.
Sir Musgame says, sorry guys, Russians not falling for the old Gestapo trick of shooting one of your own to prove you're not one of them.
No, of course they're not going to change their position on anything. People who think they are don't understand the Russians, just to say.
El Emigrante says China's CPC should party all weekend long after what happened at the White House. Great show.
Why? China's position has been to keep as much distance from this conflict as possible. They've been well aware of where it's going.
Yeah. From Adina, imagine the future of Europe with Ukraine getting EU membership. What is your take on all the Danish prime ministers? Peace in Ukraine is more dangerous than the war.
Well, I mean, it's irrational. It's an insane thing. Does she know what war is? Does she have any idea what war is? I mean, war in Ukraine is dangerous for the whole of Europe because of its potential to escalate. And the war that's being fought in Ukraine is disastrous for Ukraine. I mean, what she's basically saying is war to the last Ukrainian.
Lowe's, thank you for that super sticker. Golden Silence says, Alex, stop giving Hungary a pass. Their rhetoric doesn't match their actions. If you look at the UN, Hungary always votes with the US, like in Gaza.
Well, it does. No doubt about this. Hungary is about Hungary. It follows its own interests. When we were there in Hungary, they told us this. They're not pro-Russian. They've never pretended that they are.
Yeah. Gloria M says, you are the best geopolitical news. Sir Mug's Game says Stammer's Chago Islands deal will anger the great white orange father in Washington. Will he give the Falklands back to his buddy, Chief Crazy Talk? The
Who
Chagos
knows?
Island deal.
The Chagas Island is good, but it's a completely, I mean, it's a massive issue on the fringe here in Britain. I mean, it's not to be taken. It's a couple of islands in the Pacific. There's a major American air base at one of these islands, which is called Diego Garcia. There was a horrible business in the 1960s when the population of Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands was deported by the British, who controlled this. They're the part of the remnant of the British Empire. They were removed from the islands en masse to set up this naval base in Diego Garcia. And this has been massively embarrassing to the British government ever since. And there's been court cases and all of those things. And Starmer decided that he'd finally offload the problem by transferring the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, except for Diego Garcia, where this naval base is located. Now, I have to say, I am not frankly very interested in this question. Way back in the 1960s, the British had previously given some thought to dumping these islands on Mauritius. I don't really see why people get so worked up about this. People who've shown no concern and interest in what happened to the Chagosians, which is a real tragedy, by the way, and why Trump would want to get involved or meddle in this affair, I really can't see. It was brought up during Starmer's visit, and Trump showed no interest in it, and I think he's absolutely right not to.
Trevor says, big thanks. Thank you, Trevor. Elza says, greetings and thanks a lot to Catherine. Samuel Moroni says, are we seeing the end of NATO? What comes after?
Yes, I think we are now a big leap closer to that day.
Mo L says, hi, Alexander. How far will Russia go in Ukraine?
As long as they have to, in order to achieve their objectives.
Michael Bison, thanks for that super chat. Elza says, I think only the empire is to blame. They have not given the Death Star to support Ukraine.
Completely true.
Yeah. Josh Wood says, love your long-awaited reappearance on the Jimmy Dore show last night. I heard Putin has offered an alternative mineral deal to Trump. Do you gents think that this will go through instead of Ukraine's?
He has not offered an alternative mineral deal to Trump. He simply pointed out to the Americans that if you're talking about minerals and you want economic cooperation, Russia has far, far more than even the most optimistic calculations of what Ukraine has. So the Russians are basically saying, look, you've been backing the wrong party. If you really want economically successful partnership, we're in a much better position to provide it than Ukraine has ever been.
Nico says, you have said that the EU is like a religion, and you are right, they are a cult. That's what communism is. Every version, whether Marxism or Soviet or Maoism, they all have one thing in common, cult life.
Yeah.
Joseph, thank you for that super chat. Life is the sun, thank you for that super sticker. OMG Puppy says, in games people play, by psychologist Eric Burns, he has a chapter. Let's you and him fight, claiming that women enjoy making men fight each other. Just saying.
Well, I don't believe that, by the way. It's not my experience about women, if I can say that. But, this fight that happened, I enjoyed watching it in some respects, but I knew that it was going to come sooner or later. Not in that quite in that way, but I think we could both see it, that it was coming eventually.
Yeah. Paul Hunt, thank you for that super sticker. Alex Fanov says, there's no spin doctor to sell the White House show as win for Zelensky. Is everything what Zelensky's couple collected be arrested? Florida, Cayman Islands, Italy, Little Britain.
Yeah. Agreed.
Sir Mug's Game says, well, Russians have learned to schmooze and counter schmooze. Trump schmoozing Putin bigly, but Putin counter schmoozing like New York socialite. I dips me lid to the Putin. Clap says,
the Russians have a proper diplomacy. The Europeans no longer do, by the way. I mean, their flattery of Trump was so completely wrong and manipulative and insincere. And as for Zelensky, well, we saw what he can do.
Putin would wear a suit in a meeting with Trump. Let's put it that way. Clap says, great guys, reading my newspapers 180 degrees to know the truth. Thanks to you guys. 360. Thank you for that. Ralph Steiner says, amazing coverage on Project Ukraine. Thank you for that. FL Cologne, thank you for that super sticker. And Alexander from Locals, Law of Attraction says, arguing with people in a language that is not your native may cause huge problems, especially when something important is on the table. Very true. Very true. USA Now says the mic caught Zelensky's curse to Vance. My Info says, thanks for thinking outside the noise for us. Appreciate your analysis today. Thank you, My Info. And Flipper Zero says, I'm finding it interesting how the pro-anti-war sides are spinning it as their sides come out on top if the failed talks yesterday. I do wonder how those pro-war do not take into account that every previous war that we were losing was presented as we were just on the cusp of victory until we were suddenly losing and withdrawing. Also, the trajectory of this war leads to a confrontation between nuclear powers. The fact that people speak so casually about is frightening.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And Josie S. says, I felt relieved after this event when somebody finally put Zelensky in his place and kicked him out of the White House.
Absolutely, and by the way, he was kicked out. He wasn't. He was escorted out of the White House. He didn't leave. He was escorted out. It's extraordinary again how that has been misrepresented.
Alexander, that's everything. I know you have to go. Let me see if there's any other questions. You can go, and if there's any other questions, I'll wrap them up.
I better go. But can I just
stop?
say thanks to absolutely everybody. It's a great live stream, fantastic questions, and we certainly are living in very interesting times. Just to say.
All right.
We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be covering all of
soon.
this.
Monday. Yeah, we'll have videos. Yeah. Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. Golden Silence says, great show, Alex and Alexander. You are missing out on the next conflict. Ethiopia is determined to have access to the sea by any means. Please cover it. Yeah, we will cover Ethiopia. Actually, we were speaking with Jeffrey Sachs about talking about Ethiopia. Actually, he was just there the other couple of weeks ago. Catherine Gillum says, as someone from Scotland, I can never thank Vance and Musk enough for putting a light on horrific things are here. The Green Goblin has been exposed. Yes, he has. Alex, what is coming next? It feels like they are going from bad to good, then from good to bad. And will it continue like that between Trump and Zelensky? Yeah, I don't know how Zelensky comes back from this. He doesn't come back from this. I think Trump White House is done with dealing with the Zelensky. So either Zelensky retires, he leaves the scene, which he's not going to do. We get elections, which he doesn't want, or something else happens. But nothing's going to move forward in the negotiations that Trump does want with Zelensky as president. So basically, for the United States, Zelensky has to leave the scene. How that's going to happen, don't know. But Zelensky told Brett Baer yesterday he's not leaving. He said, I am not going anywhere. All right, I think that's everything. Thank you to everyone that joined us on this live stream. Stan, thank you for that Rockfin tip. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone on Odyssey, on Rumble. Did I get all the questions on Rumble? Need No Reason says, the reason I suggested is that they seem to be looking for a European YouTube news source. They stumble across guys like PJW, Russell Brand, etc. I think they would appreciate you reaching out to them. Yeah, we'll reach out to the creators that you listed. Need No Reason. I'll get familiar with their content and reach out to them. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Locals, we're all good. Thank you, Locals. The Locals chat, the Duran.locals.com. Zishan, thank you for that super sticker. Hidden Hollow Herb Farm, thank you for that super sticker. Super Gusano, thank you for that super sticker as well. All right, everyone. we got some videos to publish, and I've got a video to record. So I got to figure out where I'm going to walk around to record my video. Anyway, take care, everybody, and we'll be back soon.